So when I'm talking about brain waves, neurofeedback, and what is it, are you old enough to remember overhead projectors and transparencies?
Yes.
Okay,
Good. Just a little bit.
Okay.
First grade stuff.
So when I'm teaching about neurofeedback, I wish we had overhead projectors and transparencies, because the first layer of understanding is the Brodmann areas. Basically, Corbin Brodmann figured out what part of the brain does what type of processing. And that's very important when we're talking neurofeedback, because over here is planning and execution, and over here is finding your car in the mall parking lot, and over here is school learning, and over here is social learning. So we need to have an understanding of all of these little processing centers. And then the next layer would be the brain waves, which I'm going to talk a lot about, because the brain waves tell me what state each of the processing centers is in. And I used to think, well, you're either awake, asleep, anxious, or whatever. And now we know that we can have processing centers really close to one another who are doing very different things, like one's over aroused and one's kind of sleeping. So we'll talk about the brain waves and where those are. And then the third transparency, and I'd like them all stacked together and blast up on the board, but that third one would be connectivity. Does the front talk to the back? Does the right talk to the left? And so all of that's important. So when we're doing a 19-channel quantitative EEG, we've got 19 sensors on the head, and they're measuring cortical pools of neurons that are firing synchronously, and that's what allows us to read it from your scalp surface. So each of those 19 channels tells me which Brodmann areas are underneath that.
Okay.
And then we're recording on each of the 19 channels what brain waves are controlling that.
Okay.
And we record eyes open and eyes closed, sometimes on task, but eyes open, if you're a sighted person, 85% or so of your information or stimulus to your brain comes through your eyes. So theoretically, if your eyes are open, you should be on task. Your brain should be awake.
Okay.
When you close your eyes, all of that information gets quiet and you kind of go inward, and your beta brain waves should kind of calm down, and your idling brain wave, your alpha wave, should kind of come up so that you can relax and kind of drift down towards sleep. So we need to be looking at all of those things when we're analyzing an EEG.
Right.
And now I'm going to talk to you about the brain waves, and I'm going to draw on my giant whiteboard here. So, do you remember graphing from school?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, did a lot of it.
Everybody did a lot of it, but it's been a while for some of us. So on the horizontal axis, we've got what we call frequency, or the speed of the wave. And we measure frequency in hertz. And then on the vertical axis is power, and we measure that in microvolts, UVs.
Gotcha.
So I'm going to talk about the main brain waves that, you know, everybody, it kind of almost is common knowledge now. There are sub-zero or infra-low frequencies, and then there are really fast frequencies. We can measure up to 100 different frequencies per second. So, but they're all kind of labeled gamma and other things. And I'll mention that, but we're not going to focus on that. We're going to look at the things that neurofeedback's been modulating since the 1960s, and we know it well, okay? So when we're talking about how brain waves fire, think about these pools of cells, pyramidal cells, firing together. So the ones that are close together start firing synchronously. And the more that are there and they're firing together, things get bigger.
Okay.
And so if we have a delta wave, which 0 to 4 hertz in my system, it's 0 to 3 in some, is a delta wave. So I think about neurons firing up and below the line, but for ease of it not getting too messy, I'm going to keep everything above the line.
Gotcha. Okay.
But a delta may not even finish in our time frame, which is 1 second. It may finish up to 4 times.
Okay.
But again, we're naming it by how many times it cycles in 1 second.
Gotcha. Yeah.
The next frequency up, I mean, I like to talk about delta. If infants are in delta, they sleep all day. That gives you an idea of what happens when that wave is dominant. Okay.
Right.
We shouldn't see it in adults in an awake EEG.
Right.
But think about a 4-year-old. They're going to be a little bit faster, 4 to 8 cycles, and it's called a theta wave. And so it kind of looks like little plateaus or teeth. And so a theta wave is where a 4-year-old's dominant frequency is. They're in a suggestible state. If you tell them that Santa's going to come down the chimney and put stuff in their stockings, they believe you, right?
Yeah.
They can be imaginative and play with Thomas the train, and so that's their dominant state. If you were to go to a hypnotist and try to stop smoking, they would get you into this theta state, and when you're suggestible, they would tell you, cigarettes taste like the bottom of, a horse hoof or something, and try to get you to believe that so that you stop smoking, right? So that's how hypnotism works. So we can see this wave when we've got you in a eyes closed deep state.
Okay.
The next frequency up is called alpha, and it's going to happen 8 to 12 times in our time frame. Got an 11, beautiful. So, and it kind of has this peaked sinusoidal rhythm to it. Now, alpha is really important. It sets the rhythms that come from the thalamus, the thalamocortical loop, and we can think of it kind of like our shutter speed, or how much information we pick up, how many packets of information we pick up per second. So if you have a slow alpha speed, your picture is going to be a little blurry. You're not picking up as much detail. If you are really fast up here at 12 cycles per second, it's like a very fast shutter speed. And if you're filming, I don't know, the Nuggets playing basketball, you can look at exactly when that releases. You get a lot of detail.
Right.
So alpha is, how many packets of information we pick up when it's, at the back of the head. So it's our alpha speed. We talk about that a lot. So all of these are kind of subconscious processing. We do some processing here, but I'm not sure what it is. We know that there is processing in theta and alpha in dream states and subconscious material.
Okay.
But I wouldn't call it thinking.
Right.
It takes a little bit faster brainwave called our betas. 12 to 15 is low beta or beta 1, and 15 to 20 is beta 2. So in our low beta, this is where you should be right now. You're just absorbing the information. You're awake, alert. And if I had you hooked up to an EEG and I put you on task and I said, hey, if you can, tell me all the brainwaves and what they're responsible for, you'll get a big prize. Your brain would actually speed up to this 15 to 20 hertz to beta 2.
Gotcha.
And so this is more on task. But these are what we would call cognitive processing waves or thinking waves. Right. Now, if you are hiking on Green Mountain and you see a mountain lion, you're going to go into what's called high beta 21 to 35 cycles per second, and it kind of looks like this. Small, but very, very fast. And it is actually too fast for cognitive processing. We're doing some processing, but it's not what we would call thinking.
Right.
Because if you see that mountain line when you're out hiking, you're not going to get out your phone and look up maps and find your way back to the parking lot. You're going to decide, not even decide, because like I said, it's automated.
Yeah.
You're going to go into fight, flight, or freeze. Whatever your system thinks is going to help you survive. Mm-hmm. So this is actually too fast for cognitive processing. So if I see this in a resting state EEG, when you're in the safety of my office and you're not afraid of me, that's going to be a problem. That's right. An anxiety problem, right? We don't want to see that. We also don't want to see the delta in an awake adult EEG. And I don't do infant EEGs. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking at the distribution of your theta, alpha, betas in your brain. Sometimes we compare to a normative database, but what I'm most concerned about is how is your brain using its energy, and is that giving you optimal performance, or is it causing you some problems? Mm-hmm. Now, how do I figure that out? So what we do, and what most people refer to as brain mapping, we look at the information on a template. If this is my Charlie Brown head, looking straight down on top, I expect my theta and alpha to be in the back of my head. Okay. Because that's where they live, they're generated there, and I expect to see those, especially in eyes closed. It should double. But that's where my theta and my alpha rhythms should live, especially when my eyes are open and I'm awake. And alpha should double in size when you close your eyes, and we do an eyes closed recording.
Double in size power-wise or frequency?
Power-wise.
Okay.
It's bigger when you close your eyes.
Okay.
And when you open your eyes, it should get smaller again, because it's an idling rhythm. Okay. So when you close your eyes, all that beta should stop, all the input to the brain stops, and everything should get quiet. Okay. And so alpha should be big at the back of the head and barely noticeable at the front of the head. And then I would say for your betas, they should be pretty good. They're always smaller than should be smaller than our big waves.
Why is that exactly?
Well, I think it's where it's coming from. Like beta is cortically sourced. So the pools of neurons are not necessarily connected rhythmically together. So think about clapping. Mm-hmm. If you have a flash mob at the mall and everybody's clapping in rhythm, it gets really loud. Mm-hmm. But if everybody's clapping into this, these three people are clapping this rhythm and these three people are clapping this rhythm, it's not going to get very powerful.
They're like less in sync, kind of.
Less in sync, which is beta rhythms are not as synchronized as the theta and the alpha rhythms.
Gotcha.
These are synchronized and they're coming from subcortical to cortical. It's a thalamocortical loop. Gotcha. So that gets deep into the weeds of what are the sources of our brain waves. Mm-hmm. But again, our betas are in little pools on the cortical surface. Okay. And so they just don't clap as loud. Gotcha. But again, we still should see those in the executive center and getting smaller as we move towards the back of the head. So exactly opposite of our slow waves. Now, the other cool thing about neurofeedback is I'm going to see these waves in all 19 places. And if it's where it should be in the proportion that it should be, again, a lot of people use databases to make a comparison. And that works if you're a healthy, 25-year-old. I can compare to other healthy 25-year-olds. Mm-hmm. When you have head injuries or metabolic issues going on, sometimes it's not really helpful to compare to a normative database, except it'll tell you, well, you're low power. So compared to everybody else, you have no power. But that still doesn't tell me how your brain's functioning. So what I like to look at is what's called relative power, and it's just where is your brain using its energy. Now we need to know a lot more, because I need to know proportion-wise, well, what is the amplitude or the power of your alpha and beta waves? And then I know proportionally that your beta should be smaller and your high beta should be smaller than that. There should be kind of a stair step down.
Right.
And if it's not happening, then, like I just did an EEG on somebody that the tallest thing in their brain was 18 to 21 hertz beta. So that's backwards. So, we've got very high beta, bigger than these other slow waves.
Wow.
And so we know that this person's going to have, over arousal.
Right.
And no balance in that.
Mm-hmm.
So, relative power, looking at how your brain uses its energy is very important, and seeing where the waves are and what that controls as far as the Broadband areas is very important.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say that we have a kid that's got some learning issues. We might see too much frontal persistent theta, and that's a sleep wave. What's it doing dominating the executive center? We're going to have some attention problems.
Yeah.
And maybe they have excess alpha over in the Broadband area called Wernicke's, which is school learning.
Okay.
So if they have either one of these, they'll probably have some school issues. But if they have both,
There's going to be a lot
they're
of
seeking help.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not just, well, school's hard for them. They're probably seeking help.
Yeah.
So what's cool about neurofeedback is, I can put a sensor over this area and show the brain its theta activity and go, well, that theta is firing at 25 microvolts, and that means it's average, so half the time it's going above that, half the time below.
Mm-hmm.
And so on the client's computer brain interface, I'm going to set a threshold or a bar, and then I'm going to tell your brain, make your theta do the limbo.
Drop below it.
Drop below it.
Mm-hmm.
And when your theta drops below, you get the reward of seeing your movie, playing your video game, racing your car, whatever feedback we're doing doesn't matter that much as long as it's entertaining to you. But what does matter is your brain is the biggest pleasure-seeking organ in your body. And so it wants the entertainment. And so if it pops above, I'm going to have your screen go dark. And your brain, a 4-year-old and an 84-year-old can do this.
Mm-hmm.
Your brain will figure out that I'm wanting your theta to stay below the bar so that you can watch your movie. So it's called operant conditioning learning, like training your dog.
Right.
If I get a new puppy and I say, Fido, sit. And the first 6 months that I have him, I give him a treat immediately. Every single time he sits, he will learn to sit for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
This is how we learn multiplication tables, piano lessons, etc.
Right.
But what's cool about neurofeedback is it's the fastest learning known to man, because we're going to, this is basically, I call it, you can't use medicine, but functional medicine for the brain, functional intervention for the brain, because we're going directly to the behavior of the neurons and the brain waves and teaching them to fire differently.
Yeah.
So let's take our 10 hertz alpha, for example. We get 10 times every second to train that alpha down.
Okay.
That's 600 times in a minute.
Right.
Thousands of times in my 10, 20, 30, 40 minute training.
Yeah.
So what takes 5 years, like multiplication tables in school, we can do in months.
Yeah.
Right? Because we get so many repetitions every single training.
Right.
So as the power, let's say it takes you 1 to 3 sessions to get 100% underneath the bar that's set at 25. Well, then I'm going to bring that bar down to 24, and I'm going to ask your brain to do the same thing. Do the limbo, do the limbo, do the limbo, until we get it down to a normal power level.
So with that situation, is there like beta waves going on at the same time in that area? And are you trying to like train those up too, or will you just do it depending on what you need to do?
Yes, I usually make that determination based on the full analysis of the EEG, which takes several hours. But here's a cool thing. If you have too much of either one of these, let's just take this graph and make it, it's a bad analogy, but a waterbed. You old enough to know waterbeds?
Yeah.
Okay. So if this is the head of the bed, and I've got too much theta at the head of the bed, I'm going to have your little brother sit right there and smush that down. And maybe I'm seeing a little high beta that I also want to smush down. You know, maybe it's reading a 13 and it should be a 5. So I also want to set a bar and smush that down. So I'm going to have your little sister sit at the foot of the bed. Where's the water going to mound up? Right in the middle, in my betas. So I can choose to reward those betas, but I don't have to. I can just help the brain shift how it's using its power by inhibiting its firing in the waves that I do not want.
Interesting.
And we trust the brain. It wants to produce these. Happy hormones, happy neurotransmitters are associated with betas. Again, cortisol, norepinephrine, anxiety ones are associated with this. So, you know, so your brain is the reward-seeking organ. It wants to feel good, and I'm not talking about looking for a high. I'm talking about looking for that feels good because I'm functioning. I'm able to control myself. I'm able to get things done that I want to get done. I'm able to focus on what I need to focus on because I've got a test tomorrow, right? So if you've got excess theta here, you know, it's the executive network, it's the attention network, but it's also called the salience network. So what we find with a lot of ADHD kids is, well, the teacher says it's important, but it's not important to me, so I'm not doing it. And so taking down the power of that theta will increase our beta, and it turns on the salience network. Oh, if I don't want to repeat 6th grade, I actually have to do this, right? And so it, you know, that helps that function work better. And so, you know, that's what we're doing over time is just changing, you know, through, it can take between 20 and 40 sessions to make these adjustments. Part of it depends on how fast you learn, how well you sleep. You know, we get most of our people under 30, but I would say adolescents for sure, are getting 2 hours less sleep now than they did 20 years ago. And so they're getting a lot of frontal alpha because they're sleep deprived.
The brain's trying to catch up.
And so what happens is they're not sleeping enough or getting good quality at night. And so when they open their eyes, you know, when you fall asleep, your alpha kind of covers everything. But that's, again, we don't take sleep EEG, so we shouldn't see that. But if we see a lot of frontal alpha and you don't use THC, because THC and alcohol increase alpha and spread it everywhere. So if you're not doing that, but I still see a lot of frontal alpha, you're kind of sleepwalking through your day. And so you're going to have brain fog, you know, maybe some depression. You know, if you think about a sleep wave in your executive center, it's going to cause symptoms. And we need to help you sleep. And sometimes that's enough. You know, I've got a lot of pilots, and all they need is, because they're so dysregulated flying from time zone to time zone, that all they need is a little bit of help getting sleep, and they're fine. And their frontal slow waves go away. But in ADHD kids, it's more than sleep. We've got to train the brain differently.
Are all of our neurons like firing constantly? Like, are some turning off at lower brainwaves or lower speed brainwaves, that kind of a thing? Like, how does that all work?
So again, that's pretty deep into the weeds, but what I can say is that you have all brain waves everywhere all the time. But think of the neurons firing off like fireworks. They're going to go certain heights and certain patterns. So when it's firing upwards, it's polarized, and then it depolarizes and falls down, and polarizes and up, and so it really is a rhythm. Yeah. So they are kind of firing and then depolarizing and firing and depolarizing in different rhythms from different sources and locations.
Right. So like when you're asleep, that doesn't mean that or like when you have theta waves going on, that doesn't mean like less neurons are firing. It's just the rhythm that they're happening in, and that changes
depending on state.
Right. Okay.
Yes. So when you're asleep, again, you should be dominant here, but when you're in REM cycles, you're in your betas.
Right.
But they shouldn't be persistent.
Okay.
So if you have persistent beta or high beta at the vertex or in the center, that's usually an insomnia marker, because our betas should get quiet when we go to sleep. But like I said, in dreams, we're processing in a faster frequency, hopefully not enough to wake us up. We're still, unconscious.
Right.
But we do hit these betas during REM sleep.
Okay.
So it's not really about, no betas happen when you're asleep, only these, it really is all waves everywhere all the time. It's just in what proportion.
Okay. Gotcha.
So when we're awake, in the front of our head, these should be dominant. When we're asleep, these should be dominant. When we're running from the mountain lion, these should be dominant. There's also one called gamma that most people consider above 40 hertz. And what we know about it is it's a binding rhythm. It's for memory consolidation, but Joe Dispenza and others have research of euphoric states above 40 hertz. So it's kind of the new frontier. We're still learning about it, but articles come out about it every day. And so we have gamma. It's just small and fast and harder to see. We have hospital grade amplifiers here, and so we can see gamma.
Okay.
But not every neurofeedback system can see gamma.
Yeah.